I sailed an ocean, unsettled ocean, through restful waters and deep commotion, often frightened, unenlightened. Sail on, sail on, sailor.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gary Onik, and I'm your host for Cancer is Tough, But You're Tougher. I want to thank the Beach Boys for allowing us to use a piece of music that is dear to my heart. My podcast is uniquely personal. I know both sides of the cancer equation. I am a cancer specialist and researcher, as well as a cancer patient and survivor. I will address various treatment modalities in the podcast, but that's not really what this podcast is about. This podcast is about the unique cancer journey that a patient and their family and friends take when they are diagnosed and treated with this dread disease. We'll delve into the inner emotional and spiritual resources patients and their loved ones need to address their concerns of choosing a treatment strategy that will harmonize with their worldview while grappling with state-of-the-art treatments versus alternative treatments. When I was asked who's going to be my target audience, the obvious answer was everyone. It is a rare person that has not had cancer touch their lives, either as a patient, a family member, or a friend. If you're that rare person that hasn't had cancer touch their lives, wait a while. Almost certainly at some point, cancer will drag you into its maelstrom. I hope that you find this show both a resource and a comfort in dealing with your cancer journey.
Stop the crying and the lying and the sighing and my dying. Sail on, sail on, sailor.
It is my privilege to have as a guest Jeff Olson. Jeff is truly what one would have to call a modern day Renaissance man. He has not only founded and is CEO of what's now one of the most successful direct-to-consumer marketing companies in the world, Neora. He is also a best-selling author, a motivational speaker, a philanthropist, and publisher of the magazine Live Happy. He is also a member of the Happiness Hall of Fame. I have to tell you, I really have award envy over that. I want to know how I can get into the Happiness Hall of Fame. I'm a happy guy. I want to thank Jeff for coming on and talking with us today. Jeff, could you give us a little bit of background, your history, going back to when you were a young guy, a really young guy, running an airport in Texas?
Well, glad to go back. It wasn't Texas; it was actually Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm a kid that grew up blessed. By that, I grew up very, very poor, and but I grew up with great people around me that cared. I grew up in a country, really a state that's mostly made of Mexicans, and I'm a very white blonde person, so I was raised by a lot of Mexican families, and they're just most beautiful, loving people. But after when I was in undergraduate, I started working as an intern at the local airport, Albuquerque International Airport, and through that, just kind of worked my way into the management side of the business. And when I was in graduate school, and made me the airport supervisor, and eventually became a manager of the airport. And so I was doing that at a young age of 22, 23. And that was that opened the door for me to go to Texas Instruments, which opened another door, and that's just kind of how life works. But it was a great experience because it was most of it happened not because of my knowledge of airports and airplanes and leasing and that type of thing, but my ability to work with people. And it was kind of an eye opener to me that anything is built on people, and your ability to work with people will be the number one thing that will determine your success, not really your knowledge about the product, but the people. And so it was just a good start for me. I was very blessed.
And when did you move into becoming an entrepreneur?
Well, I was at Texas Instruments, which is at that time one of the top corporations in the world, top 100, 90,000 employees, and climbed the corporate ladder pretty fast there, and ended up in the intelligence we call the equipment group. I became a manager in what was called the intelligence systems group, and that's a whole long story. And I was going very well, but it wasn't that I disliked Texas Instruments, disliked people there. I really just didn't like the bureaucracy of it, the inability to, it was fun being involved and it was fun learning, but I didn't feel like I had as much control. And not that I'm a control freak, but I just wanted to move faster, let's say that. So, but also in that job, I was working with a lot of small companies and meeting people who had started their own businesses. And, these are smaller companies. They weren't, multi-billion dollar companies like Texas Instruments, but I just loved who they were as people. And so I decided to become an entrepreneur. So I just quit, and without really knowing where I was going to go. And I tried a couple of things that didn't work quite. They didn't fit my wheelhouse. And then I ran into solar. I knew nothing about solar, but solar was really hot back then. And it was really big back in New Mexico. So I went back to New Mexico and started a solar manufacturing company. It turned into a manufacturing, marketing, distribution company. Ended up being one of the largest solar companies for not just manufacturing, but setting up distributors and marketing around the United States. And so that was my first real step into successfully being an entrepreneur. Okay.
I think we've all had those unsuccessful steps into being an entrepreneur as well. Failure is one of those things you have to have at times. Did all of that experience bring you into the ideas that you have expounded on so eloquently, really, in the Slight Edge?
They were evolving. You could say that at that time. I hadn't put words around them, and from there I got on and from the solar business I went on and became a marketing director for a company called NSA, and I ended up we grew their sales from like about 80 million to 200 something million. And then I went over to a company called Quorum, which was electronics distribution marketing arm for a public company out of Hong Kong. Ended up being the CEO for them. And that's where it all started to happen for me. I started seeing something that I started seeing too many good people not doing the activity, although they were talented enough to do the activity, but not doing it consistently and persistently and long enough to be successful. It's kind of like you plant seeds, you cultivate the seeds, and eventually you harvest. That 80% of work is done before you see any kind of results. But we kind of, people, it's easy to do that in a corporate structure because you're structured to go to work at a certain time, go to a certain place, do a certain thing, and you'll do that over and over and over. You'll do that over and over for a decade. But entrepreneurs have to have the only office they have is in their head. Okay, they have to have the discipline to show up every single day, consistently, persisting, like you would if you were in a corporate business or you bought a big franchise. And so that's what that book was all about, is getting people to understand the importance of baby steps, and not just baby steps in an individual moment, but the consistency of them over time and how the compound effect would kick in. And it just resonated. I didn't write it to be an author. I wrote it to get out of my head and get people to quit asking me about it, because I started teaching it and it was affecting people. And I never put it on a book stand, anything like that. And I just gave it to over 100 people that I know. Say, here's a book, kind of quit asking me. If you want to get it, go over there and get it. And it's exploded to millions and millions and millions of books. And it's used in sports teams and hospitals and universities and corporations. And so it's organically grown, which is, a neat thing, because I think that speaks to the message that it resonates and it's real for people. It's not just something that's been marketed. Okay.
So now you've become a successful entrepreneur, a successful author, and life's going great. And then all of a sudden somebody tells you you have cancer.
Right. Been there. You were there.
I was there. I was there as well. And, can you, I mean, I can remember everything about that day. I can remember exactly how I felt. Um, was it the same with you?
uh, it's almost like I felt betrayed because I'm very, very healthy. I'm in the ease of an upper 1/2 percentile in how I live my life as far as diet, exercise, supplements, everything to keep healthy. And I've done the gene sequencing. It shows I don't have any issues and that type of thing. And also one day, when I went in for the results, I went in to get the there's no issue, okay, and there is an issue, and it just stunned me, quite honestly. And like I said, best word I can say is I felt betrayed by who I don't know. I guess just betrayed by life, but very quickly you get past that, but what I realized real quickly is I wasn't going to find my solution and the solution that everybody else follows. I was going to look for something that allowed me as a person to live my life going forward, without that cancer, so it was just like anything else. I set on a journey to figure it out.
Has that have you dealt with other people that you know now with cancer? And has that helped you relate to them and be more helpful to them over the?
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, anytime you experience something like, you can't know that feeling unless you've known that feeling. You can't know what you don't know. And so you almost feel like, golly, I remember people shared with me they had a debilitating illness or cancer, and I was there for them, but was I really there for them? And when it happens to you, you're just you're just your patience. You're there being for the person when you find out about it, because you can relate to them and identify with them, and hopefully be part of at least their emotional struggle, but also part of they're going to have to start figuring things out. And quite honestly, I think it's very dangerous. You just follow the path everybody follows. I'm not on here to give my opinion about the medical system.
Well, you can.
But I think it's very
I
dangerous.
am.
It's very dangerous just to get in line and just follow the troops. I think you need to start looking, really asking questions and looking for solutions. And so I did that for a friend. He ended up with it, and I guided him through, here's what I've experienced. And then I pointed him in different directions, and he ended up being able to resolve his, prostate cancer without, let's just say, obliterating his life, because that's kind of the answer. Let's just obliterate your prostate. And that's not a necessary solution these days, so.
No. I think that if I had to point to one aspect of prostate cancer that I find almost heinous, actually, is the lack of information that patients get about radical prostatectomy. Now, when you must have talked to doctors about radical prostatectomy. I mean, you probably looked at the range of things, I would assume, before you decided on what you were going to do. And one of the things that physicians never tell, urologists never tell patients, is that a large portion of the time, 25% of the time, they don't remove the whole cancer, that they leave cancer behind. And that's called a positive margin. And I can tell you, in 20 years in dealing with prostate cancer, more even, I've known 2 or 3 patients out of all of those, the patients that I've seen, that were ever told about a positive margin. Because if you're told that 25% of the time they're not going to cure you, well, then of course you're probably not going to be choosing a radical prostatectomy with all the problems associated with it. So, patients have to do their own research and find something that works in particular, for them. I have patients that come in and say, I don't care about my sex life. I just want the best cancer treatment, as opposed to other patients who come in, such as me. I mean, there was no way that I was going to go on hormone therapy and give up my sex life. I basically said, really, I'd rather die. Die in a way. Let me die with dignity. But I'm not going to live a life that is so limited, by my treatments. How did you find family support helped you?
Well, it's family support, and it's people who love you support. Your family's bigger than just your blood family. Okay. And I found that, I've always been a person who has built and nurtured relationships. And so I was able to lean on them. I didn't broadcast it to the world. I kind of kept, I didn't, I didn't broadcast it out, but I kept it to my family. They, of course, obviously loved me and supported me. They didn't understand when I said, this is the route I'm going. They didn't know, they didn't even know anything about the other route. Okay. But when I told them what it was and why, they just supported it more than anything else. And that was a very easy part for me is the friendly support I got from my friends. The hard thing is it's really hard the medical system is set up so one-sided, going one direction, and quite honestly, the worst person to ask about health is a doctor. Most of them are not in good shape. They're not taking care of them. They don't know anything about nutrition. They know very little about diet, and they look at them. Okay. And so for me to listen to a person who their only answer is just one answer, that was the main thing I was looking for support for, that I wasn't crazy walking away from what 80, 95% of people are going to do, that I was going to do something different, because I was like you, I wanted to live my life, I wanted to live large. I didn't want to shrink away from life because of it. And I was willing to do what was necessary. And it's just, there's always an answer out there. You just don't know where the answer is at. You just got to start looking, and I think the other thing that happens, it's not just your family relationship. I think your spiritual relationship goes up significantly. It shouldn't have to have that for that to happen, but it does. I just had a friend recently pass from breast cancer, and watching her go through it made me even more spiritual than I would have been if I hadn't gone through that with her. And again, I say to myself, why does it take that kind of things, death experiences, near-death experiences, to do that? But the truth is it does. And maybe that's just one of the main reasons it's there. It's because it was always there. But, that tragedy in your life opens the door for you to be more receptive to that, whatever that source is for you. Okay. But I can tell you, for me, the spiritual part of it was just as important as the family part of it for me.
No, I completely and utterly agree with you that for me as well, it was the spiritual aspect was a critical thing in terms of allaying fear. There's such a connection between your mind and your body. We know that your anxieties and your fears do affect your immune system and how you will do with something like cancer. And what I've seen is that my patients who have some spiritual grounding are so much calmer with the situation. Because look, if you think this is all there is, then of course you're going to be anxious and fighting for every second because you don't believe that there's something after this. I gained my grounding in spirituality from the book The Field by Lynn McTaggart, which it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but basically gave me a scientific basis for spirituality that I otherwise wouldn't have. I mean, we're kind of empiricists early on. If you can't feel it, touch it, or measure it, then it doesn't exist. And finally with the idea of quantum physics, there was a way, and the something called the 0 point field. There was a way for me to see how the spiritual actually had a scientific basis. So that was a very, very important aspect for me.
It's interesting because I didn't go down that. I went down that. I got that book from you, so I know what you're talking about. But I read some other stuff too. One of the greatest lines I ever heard is, every cell in your body, which you have trillions of cells, hears every emotion, every thought that you have. Okay, so in essence, it hears it, and it's been affected by it, and that you've got to very, very consciously what you let your conscious brain think, project. And that's why affirmations work, and prayer works, and meditation works, and even storyboards work, where your conscious brain speaks to your subconscious brain and tells you what it wants. Because the conscious brain doesn't think for itself. It just obeys like a slave. But that is the pathway to, as you will, with quantum physics, the subconscious brain is the pathway to, some people call it the universal consciousness, the herd consciousness, at least, whatever you might want to call it. Some people, you can call it the divine, but people don't realize how important that pathway is, and how important your thoughts are, your beliefs are. And when you focus on negative things grow. When you focus on positive thing grows. And in today's society, it's really challenging to be positive. The media is not reinforcing it. Whether it's I really pay attention to my philosophies and how I think. And your philosophy is everything you know, and how you hold it, and how it affects what you do. And that's going to be based on what you read, podcasts like this, you listen to. People, quite honestly, one of the biggest ones which you referred to earlier was who you associate with. You are the combined average of the 4, 5, 6 people you associate with the most, and you got to be very conscious of that. If don't have a positive outlook on life, it's hard for you. But if you find that if you can find that in your life, and consciously, focus on feeding positive thoughts and things into your subconscious brain, it's amazing what it'll start doing for you. I mean, things start happening you couldn't imagine. And that's what prayer does. Again, that's what meditation does. It gets you focused on things. So, I think a big part of cancer survival is getting the brain in a positive place, believing, in the future, seeing the future, and believing there's a better path. And because every cell in your body is listening to your brain, and your brain controls every cell in its body. There's tons of research about miracles that happen because somebody their thought process, not their physical things they took. I know you went through that journey pretty hard, and I believe in it 100%. I believe in it now more than I ever have, because since then I've started reading a lot of books about prayer. And more my books are more scientific books, how prayer works scientifically. Okay, because I'm like you, everything's got to quantifiable, and but you start realizing the power of it. Okay, and that's another gift you can give to people when they fall into this zone, especially they have cancer.
Yeah, well, I try and raise it with my patients. There's that saying that there are no atheists in the foxholes, and sometimes if you're not ready for that, because you're dealing with all the worldly things in your life, all the things, getting ahead, making money, doing all of those things, and then all of a sudden this happens, and it may be time to begin to re-examine that. So I try and push my patients toward a little bit of re-examining that, because it's important to how they're going to do. Absolutely.
I agree. Your emotional state is as important as your physical state. It really is.
Well, I am so glad that you are doing well, and and I am so proud that I can call you a friend.
Thank you. Same here.
And I want to thank you so much for coming on and giving us your perspective and telling, a bit about your story and what's important to you in this journey. Because, now we're cancer patients.
Right.
That's what we are.
The rest of your life.
The rest of your life. Thanks.
Watch that PSA count all the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Yeah, you watch it like the football scores, you know.
And it's football score. It's the score of life.
And in this one, yeah, it's ironic because you're looking for a low score.
For sure.
Jeff, thank you again. It's been a
Okay,
great
guys.
pleasure.
Thank you. Be blessed.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, this is the segment of the podcast where we talk about the hopeful trends in oncology treatment and administration. Vincent DeVita, in his book, The Death of Cancer, talks about the attitude that an oncologist should have in terms of trying everything possible to keep a patient alive, because you never know when the next great breakthrough is going to happen that could change that person's trajectory and save his life. And that's really the attitude I have as well. So this is an important segment of the show because, we hope to talk about those types of things that might be able to give you hope and change the course of your cancer if you fall into that type of category. The topic I'd like to talk to you about today is something called focal therapy for prostate cancer. This was introduced back in 2002 in a paper written by a fellow by the name of Dr. Gary Onik. Oh, that's me. And at the time that I wrote this paper and it was published, it was incredibly controversial. Basically, what I said was that a patient who had cancer in their prostate gland didn't need to have their whole gland removed or radiated or frozen. That why couldn't we treat a prostate gland just like women had breast cancer treatments where they only had the lump removed? And so I collected 9 cases at that time, I believe. And what I showed was that you were able to just treat the cancer and get good long-term cancer results. The other critically important aspect of focal therapy, or what we call the male lumpectomy, is that it markedly reduces the chances for complications. So not only are you getting an efficacious cancer treatment, but you are also lowering your chances for incontinence. In focal therapy, incontinence is virtually zero. And impotence. The studies that we have done alongside the studies of other investigators, such as Duke Bond, have shown that 90% of patients who are potent before focal therapy are potent after focal therapy. So in this, we actually get a very rare occurrence where you make a change, and usually there's, if you increase the likelihood that patients are not going to have complications, usually you pay for it with decreased efficacy, and vice versa. In this case, that's not what we found. As time went on, resistance to this concept changed. At first, literally, I was lambasted for going against the concept of a whole gland therapy. Right now, and this is the good news, is that virtually every major cancer center in the United States and in the world that has a urology program is doing focal therapy. How they're doing it can vary. I like to use cryotherapy because it has the longest history, or something called irreversible electroporation, which is the electrical killing of cancer that has certain advantages. Others might use high intensity focused ultrasound or some chemical treatment. The main concept is you don't have to treat the whole gland. You can get cancer results that are just as good as if you remove the gland. In a lot of ways, much better. Let me just take an aside and talk about radical prostatectomy. I want patients, when they are diagnosed with prostate cancer, to explore all of the options for them. They should look at radiation and radical prostatectomy, as well as ablation therapy, high intensity focused ultrasound, cryoablation, and irreversible electroporation. What patients aren't told about radical prostatectomy is that there is something called positive margins. That means that when the gland is removed, the surgeon cuts through the cancer and leaves cancer behind. That's a disaster for a patient. It means high likelihood they're not going to be cured. It means they have to undergo other therapy, such as radiation and androgen deprivation therapy, basically chemical castration. And you would think that this would be a rare occurrence, but it happens anywhere from 10 to 50% of patients. If you are going to explore radical prostatectomy, ask your physician about his positive margin rate so that you know how good he is at doing that operation. If he can't tell you, then you shouldn't be going to that physician. But it should raise the question of whether radical prostatectomy is for you in any case, because once you recur after radical prostatectomy, you've got a real serious problem. Now, with that said, some of my best friends are urologists. What bothers me about radical prostatectomy, and particularly robotic radical prostatectomy, is the fact that patients are never told about positive margins. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of prostate cancer patients, and I can think of maybe one or two that when I asked them about positive margins actually knew what it was. So the urologic community that does robotic radical prostatectomy is hiding the fact of positive margins. And why would they do that? Well, they do that because nobody really wants an operation, and they know it has complications such as impotence and incontinence. And if you also tell them that it's not going to cure them in a high percentage of patients, who's going to choose it? So to continue doing that operation, I'm really sorry to say that some of the most important fact about the operation is not being told to patients. So now you know. And now you can ask about it and evaluate the pluses and minuses of radical prostatectomy. A lot of patients don't want to have, let's say, an ablation therapy such as cryosurgery or radiation because they want the cancer out. That's a valid point. Just know the facts about it and take them into account in your decisions. So we now come to the segment in the podcast where we answer the questions from our listeners. And so out of our mailbag comes a question from Dylan, who's from Kansas City. I have prostate cancer. My cancer is of a middle aggressiveness. Being an engineer, I am evaluating the treatment options with an open mind and from a technical point of view. I am leaning toward having a more innovative treatment, such as a laser ablation of my prostate. For our listeners, a laser ablation of the prostate takes a needle that's a laser, puts it into the prostate cancer under an MR guidance that can, see the lesion, and it's ablated, and it's an outpatient type procedure. In addition, the procedure is not covered by insurance, and so would cost me a significant amount of money. My wife, who's a teacher, wants me to have the traditional treatment, which is a radical prostatectomy, and have my prostate removed. How do we solve this dilemma? That's a good question, and it's a situation that I've faced a number of times with my patients. The um, male patients that I have who I'm treating for prostate cancer, I strongly encourage their wives to be part of the process, and occasionally there is a discordant view of what should be done. Firstly, I would say do not let the money aspect of this come into your decision. I'm assuming that laser ablation of the prostate will probably cost about $25,000 out of pocket. And I'm assuming that that's not an overwhelming burden for you. And therefore, I would not let that become an issue in your choosing. I unfortunately had a patient who actually I never saw. I spoke to him on the phone, and he had a very aggressive tumor, and he was clearly better treated with an ablation therapy than radical prostatectomy, because when you have a very aggressive cancer and you're high risk, the chances that they'll cut through the cancer and leave cancer behind is very significant. So I counseled him to look toward some other treatment, and I thought that an ablation therapy would be superior for him. His wife was very against the ablation therapy, and it turned out that a good portion of that was the fact that he would have to pay for the procedure. He went on to a radical prostatectomy, and he had a positive margin. They left cancer behind. He had some significant incontinence with it, and then had to go on to all of the other treatments that were associated with it. And he called me up and said, is there something you can do for me now? And unfortunately, I had to say that, really that horse had left the barn, and, there was nothing we could do. If someday he had metastatic disease, we might be able to help with that. But so, that was a situation that, he should have followed what his thinking was. And I think that really comes down to the answer for you. This is your decision. Ultimately, you have to feel comfortable with it. You have to understand what the risks and benefits are, and then make your decision. And this way, if it doesn't work out well, if it works out well, let's not talk about the negatives here. I don't like talking about the negatives. I'm like the glass half full guy. I'm the glass full guy who every once in a while, a few drips come off the top. So let's assume that the first portion is you do well. Then everything is great. If you don't do well, then certainly your wife wouldn't want to be in the position that she influenced you to do something that didn't turn out well. So I think for the health of your relationship, it's best that you make the decision. Hopefully she'll support you in that. I'm sure that when you make the decision, she will. And this way, no matter what happens, you will keep a nice, healthy, loving relationship. Thank you for that question. If you would like to ask us a question, you can go to GaryOnikMD.com. There is a contact form that you can fill out, and it will send us your question, and hopefully we'll be able to answer it on the air. Thank you for listening to our podcast. I hope that it provided you with some useful information, some hope, and some comfort. Thank you very much.
Sail on, sail on, sailor. Sail on, sail on, sailor.